just gonna record this. So, I'm just going to briefly go through a little bit of context, which I found it a little more interesting to engage with the text, having read a little bit of Adam Smith before, so I found this book, which I'm also going to talk about. Oh, yeah, I did, but did you guys?
Yes,
yeah,
we talked briefly.
Cool. All right, so just to not consider this particular context of political or economic theory as coming out of a vacuum, so I'm just going to kind of briefly set the tone. So Aristotle, interestingly enough, kind of responding to Plato's communist ideas, he puts forward this pretty influential kind of critical view that will find impactful reclamation in the age of early economic expansion. So while he's advocating for private property, he holds a controversial discussion concerning the art of getting wealth. So he sees men, like other animals, as kind of naturally self-sufficient and with a finite possible amount of property to satisfy his wants. And in the light of an ideal self-sufficiency and practical management of household, so he dismisses this art of profit-oriented exchanges and natural and destructive of the bonds between people and households. And there's an interesting quote. So interchange of this kind is not contrary to nature and is not a form of money-making. It keeps to its original purpose to re-establish nature's own equilibrium of self-sufficiency. So this is this general scorn of profit-making and self-interest. So it became like a prominent strand in Western economic thought. And after it was picked up by medieval thinkers, it goes in through history and medieval philosophers as they denounced this retail commerce as unnatural and immoral, according to Christian values then. So this sets an important historical context in the Age of Enlightenment, where this idea of self-interest, after being condemned for centuries, was suddenly seen in a new light. So I think it's also worth mentioning Spinoza, and so where he's kind of talking about restraining the wild passions of men and harnessing the self-interests, and conceiving kind of the man as he really is. And then there's Machiavelli with the same idea, which actually already became like a widely asserted maxim by 18th century thinkers. And so I felt like this was important. There's kind of this idea of blossoming idea of social engineering in the prelude to kind of extensive economic expansion in Europe, and these guys were also quite important to think about. So there's this guy, Alfred O. Hirschman. Recommend reading this. This is really interesting. So he speaks of the French Enlightenment as a kind of blossoming idea of social engineering, but in the prelude to this expansion, as I just mentioned, there was no concrete framework for the science of politics and economics and contemporary philosophy. So they had a chance to freely theorize and reflect on each other without really having to strictly concentrate on theories of possible threats that commerce and pursuing self-interest can have in society, and on such things like freedom or peace. And this kind of general religious rhetoric of that time held it that kind of any real life consequences were happening due to unchangeable dimensions like God. And unhappiness was ascribed to the will of the God again, so or just simply choice, human choice. And so Hirschman, he kind of paints this idyllic image of happiness that has just been recently kind of invented in Europe. So before that, there was not really a happiness. There was just, stuff that was going on by chance or by the will of an omnipotent God. So this is where kind of Montesquieu he puts forward like a new rationale that converts the pursuit of profit and interest into this powerful force to neutralize evil, passions of war, and also political violence. And so Sir James Stewart also shared his views on the concept of social engineering, and it kind of paved a way of a long-standing intellectual tradition according to which the expansion of the market, in addition to accumulating wealth through the dividing the labor and building up productivity. So this will also bring about a new type of person. This is important. So in contrast to the feudal society and feudal social attributes that were kind of considered crude and violent, so Montesquieu believed that through dividing labor, the spirit of commerce will bring about the spirit of politeness, frugality, moderation, rationality, and order. Also kind of passionate enthusiast of French laissez-faire. So kind of retail and free exchange was actually liberating, kind of collaborative social power with an ability to construct respectful relationships between the nations and households. So in this book, what is that? So there's two enlightenments. So in tandem with the French tradition of social perfectibility, the so-called Scottish Enlightenment, Adam Smith, they saw the development of commerce and monetary trade as bringing this unintended social consequence, yet not necessarily negative. And he is obviously widely proclaimed to be a founding father of economics, as we all know, probably. But he saw something different in the way we divide responsibilities in a market society in comparison to past societies, and he makes like distinction of the social division of labor and a detailed division of labor. Okay. So here we can see the break from the French tradition stressing on straightforward, causal, complex relationships between capitalist enterprise and social change. So there is apparently now there's a connection finally between what we do and how the change is going to be put forward. And also for Smith, this profit that was already talked about, it became much more kind of empirically linked with a particular point in history. In a detailed division of labor in a complex social context. So actually this idea of the invisible hand was rather developed in the theory of moral sentiment rather than the Wealth of Nations, which not a lot of people know, but this kind of philosophical basis is formed in this book throughout chapters. And then later he already develops this more concrete understanding of how economics fits into this idea of the so-called invisible hand that forcefully integrates people into capitalist social interdependence, and also including those who don't really want to be included. So in that idea, so no one is really trying to do good in a society, but just in a way, kind of this invisible hand promotes us to lead an end, and often a positive one, but it's not part of our intention. In fact, he's actually quite cynical of people who say to be altruistic, which I also find quite interesting, and there's a little bit of that in the text, or kind of hints at that, or maybe I read it wrong. Don't know. And So, theory of moral sentiments. This is a kind of a very, I think, a central theme of how a man not just wants to be loved, but also be lovely, and have this idea of this third person giving you, which is often created in our own minds, that gives you the validity of being lovable. And so these are just a few central themes that he develops throughout this chapter of the book in general. So morality, sympathy, which is combined of, I guess, empathy in the way we socially interact. Compassion. Actually, I think the difference between sympathy and empathy, I don't think he really stresses on that too much in these texts. And I feel like there's something different between sympathy and empathy. So with sympathy, you just feel for each other. But when we talk about empathy, you feel with that person. I don't think actually Smith believes in empathy in a way. Well, that's, I guess, would contradict most of what's going to come throughout this book, and this idea of conscience, in which you are constantly resolving some moral questions using this idea of the spectator and the agent. So he talks about this quite a lot. And
could you be, because at the time, because like in the text, it referred to the not significant, the definition we give to words today in the context of today could be different at that time, because he made quite references to certain things like, I think, being sympathetic.
I think so. Maybe there was in that particular time, I think maybe he unconsciously tried to go against empathy that was cultivated a lot maybe in religious practices of the time. Maybe that was his departure, even though he's very religious and he constantly keeps telling us that. But so virtue, and interesting thing is where he starts to really define the idea of justice versus and all other virtues, and how that's the only central idea that cannot be escaped, and that's the only virtue that people have that we that is really necessary in order to live a happy life. And justice so then becomes inescapable and quintessential. Also, kind of total reliance on the system. So he's a system-making philosopher, which in his case means kind of God-made system. So he refers to it as nature. That will keep everything intact, and in the end, this is all like this part of the intelligent design, which I find a little bit problematic. I don't know how about you guys, but then I kind of thought that maybe this particular theme could be kind of revisited, as in, well, now since we have all these debates, so if we maybe overlook that fact and look at it as maybe natural selection. So how natural selection guides us, like people, to not kill each other. So I think that could be helpful in order to understand the kind of core argument in today's context. So not to think about this too much, otherwise this is all pointless.
What was that sentence made?
Which one?
The one that you highlighted.
Man naturally desire not only to be loved, but to be lovely, to be a natural and a proper object of love. He naturally fears not only to be hated, but to be hateful. So this is this comes out of almost a duality in ourselves when we have our kind of active drives and passions. So he speaks of these two persons within each one of us, the person inside and person outside. And this person inside is the one who constantly keeps on morally question yourself. So this person inside needs to be lovely, not just loved. So and it also always points out to someone else in the society as a person, as a human being, as a fundamentally a social being. So this creates this interdependence of people, if you see what I mean. Because you can't be lovely if there is no such thing as loveliness, but you can be loved if there are just two people.
I don't know.
See the argument?
The difference between loved and lovely. I hate it, but to be hateful. I mean, hateful to me sounds like you are a hateful person, but it says, i.e., unnatural.
And
proper. I don't
object of
understand
love.
the sentence. I mean, I have this problem with the text in so many places.
Well, maybe actually this example is a little bit weird. But if you leave just that outside, then I think that makes proper sense. And I actually like the wordplay on the loved and the lovely, and because lovely presupposes some sort of a social understanding of loveliness, in which way we all share the idea of virtue and what is virtuous.
And where does that come from?
From the text. This is
but where does that shared understanding of the what is lovely and
from the lived social experience. So you really have to contest these things as well. So as social beings, and he makes actually quite a controversial argument there in the very beginning of the text, where he says that if a man was born in an island, where it is. So 63. If a man had been born from his birth a stranger to society, his whole attention would be focused on the object of his passions, the external bodies that either pleased or harmed him.
Yeah.
So then your whole life revolves around passions, almost very basic needs of survival. But once you become a social being, then you will eventually become to share by trial and error, really.
So he's saying that like morality comes from the social.
Yes.
Okay.
Necessarily.
Without the social,
I mean, I think he does believe in some kind of general moral code, yeah. And he expands it actually by the end of the text, and in the last chapter there's a really I feel like this whole part 3 is just a prelude to the last chapter, which is the kind of the most crucial one, and I think we should read it all together. It's not
the last one then.
The last one where he talks about the duty. The duty, yeah.
Oh, okay. You're talking about chapters within the part.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So where he talks about justice and a little bit more, we can concentrate on that a little bit later.
It's really interesting, actually. Sorry to bombard your presentation, but the notion that to be moral beings and etc., we have to be in contact with each other.
Constant contact,
the
yeah.
Importance of the social experience. Otherwise, we just think within ourselves in some ways, I suppose. And what an important message in the age of this Facebook and everyone being the narcissistic idiot typing shit on. It's very contemporary now that I think. But sorry, I don't.
No. Don't worry. Actually, I was thinking that maybe we can. I can also read out a really nice quote that I really liked about always having to. Oh, okay. So it's on page 60. Maybe I actually have it in the. No, so it's on page 68, and he says, unless a man avoids being actually blamed or reproached, he can't be completely sure. He can't even be fairly sure. 68. 68?
But where?
Second right side, right in the middle, where it starts unless a man avoids being actually blamed or reproached, he can't be completely sure. He can't even be fairly sure that nothing in his conduct has been blameworthy. And a wise man might.
It's like a kid.
Yeah.
It's like a child.
Yep.
Protected by the parents.
We also talked about this in your session, Michael. Like always having to engage in that internal dialogue. You always have to contest, your own self. Noesis, that's a kind of a similar theme. And I also like this quote because I feel like he's writing in a time where there's mathematics and science and everything, but this kind of philosophy, he really wants to be seen on a very emotional level, so he wants you really to relate to it. And so when I read this text, I found it really useful to think about death when he was talking about. So men have voluntarily thrown away life to acquire after death a renown that they could no longer enjoy. While they still lived, they imaginatively anticipated the fame that was in the future times to be bestowed on them. The applause that they were never to hear rang in their ears, and the thoughts of the admiration whose effects that they were never to feel played about their hearts. Banished from their breasts the strongest of all natural fears, and led to them to perform actions that seemed almost beyond the reach of human nature. So this idea of like death, of that, why we sometimes people heroically kind of think about death, about this praise that we're never actually going to hear. So there's this feeling of what he was saying, kind of being lovely, actually. So it's something bigger, something more general than being loved. Goes a bit deeper than just our everyday nature. This is also another interesting quote that is in two parts, just because it's a little bit long. But let me just read it out. So if the man without is the one that is not within. So the man without is our kind of everyday person that we live, that acts. So if the man without should applaud us for actions we haven't performed or motives that didn't influence us, the man within can immediately humble the pride and the elation that such groundless acclamations might otherwise cause by telling us that when we accept them, we make ourselves despicable because we know that we don't deserve them. And on the other side, if the man without should reproach us for actions we haven't performed or motives that didn't influence us, the man within can immediately correct this false judgment and assure us that we are not proper objects of the censure that has so unjustly been laid on us. But the man within seems sometimes to be astonished and confused by the noisy vigor of the man without, the violence and loudness with which blame is sometimes poured out on us seems to stupefy and numb our natural sense of praise, worthiness, and blameworthiness. And the judgment of the man within, even if not absolutely altered or perverted, are so much shaking in the steadiness and firmness of their decision that they lose much of their natural effect on securing the tranquility of the mind. And this is a brilliant quote about how, like, in today's fiery kind of political noise, we completely numb those feelings inside that really lead us somewhere. So this kind of noisy vigor of the man without, the noisiness of our own actions.
Could you just explain a little bit? Who is the man without? Is the other?
No, the man within the heart. I think this is where the quote starts. It's your own kind of inner, deeper moral compass, and the man without is yourself. The man without is your kind of physical body, external, so it's the actor. So the same as the agent and the spectator.
So is he saying here that this kind of constant noise and aggressiveness, it actually can impact the man within, or shake it, or actually shake the foundations of your person, the violence and loudness? I mean, this scorn that we, especially for public figures, get, can actually wound very deeply.
Yes.
Is that what he's saying?
Yes. So, obviously I think later in the chapter he does say that eventually time will naturalize everything, but then we die, you know?
Yeah.
And so sometimes we're just so stubborn with what we do that we shake the inner moral, not even shake, but we kind of suffocate it. And not like forever, though. So there's still room.
So we can't, it's so aggressive that we have to kind of silence.
Yeah. And we also often blame ourselves a lot. So apart from we always being blamed for, so let's say politicians are really kind of, sometimes you really don't understand. So how if everyone keeps telling you, the whole world keeps telling you that you're an asshole, why don't you hear this? So I've often kept thinking about this. This is crazy, but this is why I like this quote. This kind of makes sense. Yeah, so I found this painting by Francisco Goya, and so this is a fight with cudgels, actually, 1820, 1823, not very far from where we are right now. And I don't know if you can you understand what's going on in the painting, apart from just the fight with cudgels.
It's a conflict, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but they're both kind of knee deep in quicksand, fighting with cudgels, and I found it really, really interesting. And interesting thing is that quicksand, doesn't just kind of swallow you on its own. It actually requires collaboration, cooperation.
It's right than the postmodernist.
So you're village. We're gonna get there. So this is more or less like a scenario that I found quite interesting. So this is kind of the agent and the spectator, the person within and the person without, and this is the kind of justice that swallows are in. Do we want this or not? Hopefully, but it requires our constant cooperation. But this could be reinterpreted in many ways, like this, say. So, rich and the poor.
So does that imply that there's the willingness or acceptance of wanting to go and cooperate with something that will annihilate you?
Yes, in the end. So, because in the end we will die, and he speaks about kind of overcoming, being a happier person by overcoming very big difficulties, by getting your leg chopped off, so in the end, it's kind of this weird justification of the social injustice that he speaks about. So he kind of says, like, stop fucking whining, even if you're poor, which I found a little bit weird. And there's also this passage that I want to come back together, that I didn't fully understand. But the same scenario is, you can kind of speak about psychoanalysis, and as you said, Villa, this is how what I kind of took out of this text.
You'd have Western civilization.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it for now, in terms of my presentation. But if we just quickly go over this one passage on page 70, just to speak about this this kind of passage where he speaks about this discounted old officer that keeps whining about his situation, and
that spoke so strongly to me.
Yeah,
I see that every day. Maybe you can read it.
Just read it out loud, maybe.
Which one would you like to read?
Well, I like it. I mean, where it starts from a complaint that we have all heard from many venerable but discontented old officer is that, and until the quote ends, and maybe the next chapter of it. So, pretty much this whole page.
Yeah.
Do you want to read it?
Whole thing.
Well, it's not that long.
Sorry, which one?
Oh yeah, we can just read the complaint. The most deplorable thing Well, you said it spoke, so...
Yeah, okay, yeah, I mean, a complaint, I mean, I think a lot of this like resonated very strongly with me, but I really struggled to find the big picture in the argument in all of this. But I mean, I was also very tired when reading it, but anyway, a complaint that we have all heard from many a venerable but discontented old officer is that an assiduous courtier is often more favored than a faithful and active servant, that attending and applauding are often shorter and surer roads to promotion than merit or service, and that a campaign of hanging around as a courtier at the court of Versailles or St. James's is often worth 2 military campaigns in Germany or Flanders. Well, I mean, it just brought to my mind the professional context at work where effort is rarely justly rewarded. It's more about playing a political game and pleasing the sovereign or whoever the person of power is. I mean, I see this every day. I mean, completely true at the modern academic department as it was, you know, back then. So it's quite interesting to read. But so what does this relate to in terms of the broader argument of this chapter? I mean, I don't know, Michal, do you want to say something about that? I mean, you don't want to put you on the spot.
No. I also have a question mark in there, and it's. I mean, I can read it. It's it's just gonna take 5 minutes, but it's just very. I'll just read it. So, but what is considered as the greatest reproach, even to the weakness of earthly sovereigns, has been ascribed to divine perfection as an act of justice. So the duties of devotion, the public and private worship of God, have been represented, even by able and virtuous men, as the only virtues that can either entitle us to reward or exempt us from punishment in the life to come. The philosophically inclined Bishop Massilian, in a ceremony of blessing the flags of a military regiment of Catinat, said this to the officers. The most deplorable thing in your situation, gentlemen, is that in a hard and painful life, in which your duties sometimes go beyond the rigor and severity of the most austere cloisters, your sufferings won't help you in the life to come, or in many cases, in this present life. Alas, the solitary monk in his cell, obliged to mortify the flesh and subject it to the spirit, is supported by the hope of an assured reward and by the secret support of the grace that softens the yoke of Lord. But can you, on your deathbed, dare to represent to God that wearing daily hardships of your employment? Can you dare to ask him for any reward? Alas, my brother, if one single day of those sufferings were consecrated to the Lord, it might have brought you eternal happiness. Offering up to God one single action that was painful to nature might have secured you for you the inheritance of the saints, and you have done all this, and in vain, for this world. So does he kind of promise you that your sufferings will be, like, the justice will prevail? Is that what he said? That was just unclear.
Quite religious.
Yeah.
If you study the works of Martin Luther King, he says something similar, that those who struggle for justice have some kind of cosmic companionship.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more or less the same quasi-religious, hopeful viewpoint that in the end, if you keep struggling for good things, you will succeed. It's quite helpful, actually, especially if you're suffering from depression, if you have so many difficulties in life. So you can bring on that and you can overcome many difficulties, and then you go back and see tomorrow.
So it's kind of like encouraging.
Is saying here that even though it's not necessarily going to reward you in your professional life immediately, at least, there's like a satisfaction that comes from pursuing the right thing in the long run. Is Smith saying exactly that here?
Both that you can get some rewards or you can get some satisfaction. You can get some meaning in your life because you're struggling for good things.
Yeah, because I mean here he says that the old officer complains that the righteous justice doesn't happen at the workplace, basically. But
Yeah.
then he goes here and says that whatever, man, it's still worth pursuing justice, even though it's not happening.
Is it really a contradiction? Because
I don't think it's a contradiction. No, I don't think it's
Yeah,
a
that's what I'm
contradiction.
thinking as well. I don't think it is, because it's coming from a place of, it's a religious person, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's coming up from, going from where it says the most deplorable things, talking to the military, the officers, sorry, saying that, oh, you might do all this in vain because you haven't got that compass, which is the, bring yourself to being virtuous to the law.
Yeah.
So no matter what you're doing, you can go even cut your foot or whatever, but because you haven't got that compass in you, that is in vain. The leg that you just cut off. So I think that's my understanding. I may be wrong, but it's just saying to the people that we need to wind down and go to that place of virtue, which is pleasing to.
So in this text is a broader. Is he advocating against kind of silencing the consciousness or something like that? Is he advocating against being strategic?
I don't know. I feel like he advocates against whining, and he actually used the exact word in the text a couple of times.
Right.
And I mean, I see this. Why I had a question mark here is, I mean, the next part of what comes after is quite weird as well. Let me just read it out for you. So the comparison between the futile mortifications of a monastery and the ennobling hardships of hazard and of war, the supposition that one day, 1 hour employed in the former should, in God's eyes, have more merit than a whole life spent honorably in the latter, is surely contrary to all our moral sentiments, contrary to all the principles by which nature has taught us to regulate our contempt or admiration. But this is the spirit that has reserved the heavenly regions for monks and friars, and for people whose conduct and conversation resembled those of monks and friars, while at the same time condemning to hell all the heroes, all the statesmen and lawgivers, all the poets and philosophers, former ages, and yada yada yada. I'm not understanding. Is he highlighting a contradiction, or is he going somewhere else with this?
Two long sentences actually makes everything confusing.
Well, I mean, it's confusing with 2 long sentences, 1 long sentence. It's still bloody confusing.
Sorry, but is he saying that monks who do the hard work, they go to heaven, but glory seekers, they go to hell?
That's what I can't understand.
I think it's just him pointing out the injustice of it, how all these other people also walk and do.
So he is highlighting the.
He did say it's not one of such a straight application of this most respectful doctrine. So he does think that it's abnormal.
Oh yeah, actually I think maybe I was so confused that I didn't even read the last bit of this. I just that's crazy. That's crazy. Well, yeah, but I mean, nevertheless, I feel like why I kept on questioning this particular part is that he somehow tells lower classes and poor to still look up to the virtues of the rich in order to kind of balance out and keep the kind of class system and structure intact. That we should not condemn them, but still look up to them and want to be like them. I know I don't have an exact place in text where he kind of just goes on about this, and also from kind of literature about this text, there's a lot of points made, but I just that's the one. I think that's the part where critics really attacked him later in after the Industrial Revolution, when they really saw all of that going south and people are really becoming trapped in the economic structures.
So this is some kind of Victorian morality.
Yeah.
proceeding.
Mm-hmm.
standards and the virtues of the rich, but the poor do have their own standards,
Yeah.
and that's where I think he's wrong. The poor
But
do
he,
have
he
their-
does speak about the standards of the poor, and he kind of like, well, on one hand, he does say that you actually, if you are poor, then you actually can be happy, and really happy, and even more happy because you, like, kind of life throws at you shit, you crawl out of this shit, becoming a bit like a much of a bigger person, so you're the inner person is happy and satisfied with the general conduct and the general will. Whereas I still don't understand when a poor person is supposed to look up to a rich person as virtuous. So how does that does that really leave you satisfied enough? So that kind of I still don't really think so. So I know that this is the point where where a lot of Marxist critique was based upon as well.
Yeah, this kind of reiterates the critique or highlights, these as like bourgeois philosophers.
Mm-hmm.
They were not only that, but they were also that. So, for example, I just prefer the South London to West London. I just the mood. I don't know. Just I prefer the atmosphere somehow. So, like you said, there is something different rather than South London having to be like West London.
Yeah.
That's a bad idea. Now it has to build, on its own terms. So, and he couldn't see that maybe here.
Mhm.
He just saw that the bourgeoisie have the virtues, but and that's what kind of the Marxist critique hits at and says that, hey, you don't know what you're talking. You're talking from a position. You cannot think beyond it.
Similarly, the Marxist critiques, I would recommend you two books from George Orwell.
Mm.
Down and Out in Paris and London is the first. Down and Out in Paris and London. And the other is The Road to Wigan Pier.
The road that we can see.
The Road to Wigan Pier.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in these works, George Orwell outlines the lifestyles and the ideas, the gestures, the values and the ethics of the working class, and he labels all these common concepts he identifies in them as common decency.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
yes, so I'm not discarding entirely Adam Smith. I think sometimes that you do have to look to the successful in order to get some good work ethic, but at the same time, you must not discard the values and the persistence and the resilience of the poor. So
I guess that's also like a point in kind of Marxist epistemology where all of these values and as virtues have been left out of the of the modern thought for so
it's not
long.
just Marxist. Many people have commented on that. Orwell was anything but Marxist.
Yeah, you're
Christians
right.
also like Karl Polanyi.
Who?
Karl Polanyi.
He's a Christian.
Yes,
I didn't know that.
yes,
Oh,
I actually
reading
didn't know
even
that
more.
either.
The Great Transformation.
yes.
Oh.
He's a Christian.
Oh, yes.
He made many people consider him a socialist, but the thing is that Christians and socialists share some common values.
This is very important. This is very important because a lot of the Finnish philosophers who I've been really interested in their work and their writing, and they build from the Enlightenment, but they indeed criticize the poor for their lack of morality. But actually, they as an alternative to that, they see the rich in Finland. And frankly, I find a lot of rich people very nocivating in terms of their morals. So I think what you're saying is such an important point that you have to get out of that loop. Because then you're saying that, hey, poor people, why are you not like Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg or something? It's like, look, these both options are really bad, and we have to put, like, don't you think? I mean,
Yeah, they could be either both really good or really bad.
And there are plenty of historical examples that proves not mine, it's not mine, my view actually, it's this viewpoint that you can go to late 19th century America, South and West, where there was some huge spread of what we call populism, not associated with Donald Trump, because it was a completely different style of populism. Now, populism is more than a style. Populism is the idea, basically, that those who can make more sacrifices should contribute more. And then you can see movements from farmers starting out and spreading quickly with placing emphasis on cooperativism, both on competition. It wasn't communist or socialist like that. Actually, in America, socialism has never gone big roots. It was for free market on the one hand and cooperative at the same time. The farmers challenged what they saw as a threat to them, the morality of the Wall Street, of the idea of becoming rich and pay the debt to the Wall Street because the debt has strangled them, so they could not produce anything, and their crops were rotted. So they had to do something from themselves, and that's quite interesting because you see for the first time in history that instead of having a resentment against the rich, you have rejection and action.
fantastic.
So
what's the reason of that?
Really interesting.
So you can read Lawrence Goodwin with Y in the end, The Democratic Promise. It's a long book, 600 pages.
Ooh.
You can also read Postel's book about so many.
I'll just start with that one. Yes,
Yes,
but I'll start with this one.
Yes.
But I think it's such an important point that you're making because one of the things that I've been thinking about recently a lot is that when now you have the I think that the left, I don't know actually British politics well enough to comment on it, but certainly the Finnish left is defined by resentment and identity politics. My question then is that is this fundamentally what the left is and has always been? I think what you're pointing is that no, it doesn't have to be this. It can be something different. It has been something different, and I think this is a really important message in relation to some of the classic liberals that I've been reading in Finland. They don't have this idea in their head. They only see left in bad terms. They only see them in Smithian terms. That the way to move forward is for the poor people to be like rich people. No. Like you said, it has to come with its own terms and do something creative, progressive, move towards something, and neither be like fuck the rich.
Build something, engage in action, put yourselves together, and act in concert.
Exactly. It's very proactive. It's creative. It's not only active in response to something, wanting to tear down, but it wants to build something based on its own. Oh, that's so important.
I forgot to mention that this movement changed America, and although it failed to establish
I was coming to that.
Standards, it failed because of leadership.
Of the lack of or failed leadership.
Personally, I
Not
don't.
only leadership, also white supremacy did a lot of damage to the movement because it associated white farmers with the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party then was the party of the white supremacy, the opposite of what we have now. They switched positions after the Southern strategy.
What a shame.
Look what happened. We had the People's Party, which emerged from grassroots, from the farmers.
Yeah.
But members of the People's Party associated themselves with the Democrats because they wanted to attract a wider audience. So, white supremacy became a weapon to mobilize voters in favor of them. And so there was a division. The Color Farmers Alliance, which was part of the movement, became were attracted to the party of Lincoln, which was the Republican Party, but the White Farmers Alliance, instead of coming together as it was initially, was associated itself with the Democrats, and it was also the bimetallism, free silver, free gold. So the Republicans were for
Metalism is.
bimetallism, yes. Free silver was the democratic idea.
Wow.
Exactly. So the populists were for silver, the Democrats were for silver. They united themselves together, and white supremacy became actually a kind of underground ideology. So it smashed the movement. The movement was absorbed by the Democrats, but their ideas were acting in the background. They became part of the collective unconsciousness. So when Roosevelt came to power, much of the demands of the farmers have been implemented.
Exactly, yes. The New Deal.
Yeah. Good call.
It's good to know that.
I mean, I do think that the crisis of the left is the biggest crisis that we have. I mean, all this stuff can't be solved with libertarianism or super rich or anything like that. This is the crisis, and you're pointing to some history to understand how it could move forward from the current deadlock. I mean, this is just my. Feel free to disagree. This is
No, I
my
completely
point.
agree, and this is what I felt that this part was really. I mean, if we really try to kind of find something intrinsically humane that hits home to the current situation with the left, I think this quote is amazing. I feel like we are completely blinded and stiffened and paralyzed by the blame that we impose onto our opponents and onto ourselves, because this is what the left is doing. It's saying that we fucked everything up.
It
We're
hates itself. It hates its opponent. It's just resentment.
we
It
fucked
hates
everything up. Yeah.
Nihilistic resentment towards everything.
And there is we are actually kind of we're blinding our inner moral compass that actually helps us to kind of actually make some change.
Yeah, actually, I cannot unpack it, but I thought that there was something. I felt intuitively that there's something important at about political communication. Yeah, on page 73. Okay, I'll try to read it, but two different sets of philosophers have tried to teach us this hardest of all the lessons of morality. Some have worked to increase our sensitivity to the interests of others. They want us to feel for others as we naturally feel for ourselves. The other group have worked to lessen our awareness of our own interests. They want us to feel for ourselves as we naturally feel for others. It may be that both have carried their doctrines a good distance beyond the just standards of nature and propriety. The first group are the whining and melancholy moralists who are perpetually reproaching us for being happy when so many of our brethren are in misery, who regard as impious the natural joy of prosperity, that doesn't think of the many wretches who are laboring under all sorts of calamities, poverty, disease, horrors, and death, etc., etc. So I don't know. It just sounded to me like Greta Thunberg. I don't know.
This long sentence is actually irritating. I could hardly get it. So it's like a guessing game every time you do this.
Yes, exactly. But something about mining, melancholy, moralists, blah blah blah. I don't know. I cannot explain this to you, but I felt there's something about political communication.
It is. It would apply to how the closing to me would be American politics and how they're trying to push to tax the rich.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think one I think he's a professor at Stanford. Don't quote me on this, I might be wrong. He wrote a theory on how rich people are owing so much that is a cause for why so many people are so poor
Mhm.
because all the money are being held by the rich, no matter how much charity they're doing. And I think this directly like also criticize that,
Okay, yeah.
but also in our current.
So he's a kind of bourgeois thinker, isn't he?
Smith or the Stanford guy. He kind of he goes on then later then he goes on like a long tangent on how everything in the end will reach its resolution in which you will be happy, but now you will have to stop whining about being poor.
It's this kind of Victorian hypocrisy.
18th century ideology, so it's like the world is moving into a steady trajectory towards some kind of earthly paradise. So stop mourning, everything is going to be fine in
Yep.
the future,
Yep.
despite minor setbacks.
Yep.
It's the
yeah,
ideology
yeah,
of-
despite minor setbacks, yeah. And then come Industrial Revolution.
It's actually Hans Rosling, Factfulness, his Gapminder, where he shows how everything is going into progress. And I don't know if you know.
It sounds like Steven Pinker.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really oppressive.
It is impressive, yeah. Don't we think, I mean, coming back to populism, whether old-fashioned or as how it is now, don't you think in a way it's managed to kind of brainwash us
But populism
to the point where we're thinking, like you're saying, someone saying, oh, you mourn too much for being poor, shut up now. We kind of believe that in, because like Smith said in the first, at the beginning of his paragraph is, it's like the feeling that we have, whatever is out, like the out without man, is what is in society.
Mm-hmm.
Will take on board, even though within man is saying to him, I've got my reservation. But because you see what is out there, i.e. the populism, we tend to take what is out rather than being conducted by what's within.
Well, he does provide. Well, in the last chapter he does talk about the duty and this kind of general rule to which you always have to reference to. So instead of just kind of pointing in reference to society, there's still this kind of self-regulatory kind of way of conducting our everyday life that will, in the end, necessarily like stabilize everything because it's a part of the intelligent design by the omnipotent God. So that's kind of how he speaks about this.
Do you feel that this is a little bit like a kind of secular Chileanism?
Secular what?
Secular what?
Chileanism.
What's
It's
that?
millenarianism.
All right.
It's a kind of, it was a religious sect during the English Civil War, and it believed that everything that actually the Messiah is coming.
Ah, okay.
So it's a bit like that. So everything is coming to we are approaching some kind of second coming on earth. So everything is going to be fixed. You don't have to know about it. So
Yeah.
But look, this is
Pretty
what
much.
the libertarians tell us today,
yes,
isn't it?
yes.
Just let the market do its work.
Do its work,
it'll
and
be
it
good,
will
man.
eventually.
It
I mean,
won't.
But then that's where the left says, oh, no, it's not happening. That's why they're mourning. They're saying, no, it's not happening. You just taking us for mugs. It's not happening.
But-
you just kind of putting a cotton wool on our eye.
Yeah.
While
Bourgeois
the rich,
ideology.
bourgeois, the rich are getting richer, and you're telling us we are rich. At the end of the day, what you say there, I'm thinking is someone from the conflict theory who wrote that passage, because they're the one who kind of criticize or critique the bourgeoisie in society and the oppression that we get from the system. So with that cotton wool on us, we obviously cannot, well, a lot of people cannot stop mourning people from the left, and then it's becoming too much that we want, it's too much mourning, and then we get the people again saying, if you didn't succeed, it's your fault. But the society as it's been constructed didn't give you all the resources for you to get where you meant to be. At the end of the day, conflict theory, like the Marx and the Engels, have are the precursors or whatever of, is all about the resources not being enough for all of us to share, and therefore those who manage to put their hands on it say, that's mine, so I'm going to create a way that you either, I'll be on top and you be down, and then that's where the oppression goes. So the left is not going to leave it as
So to counteract that point, which I agree with, what's sort of the valuable thing of this text to take from it?
Do you know what I actually think? I mean, he seems like he says all of these things with a certain, like a certain helplessness. So he's almost like saying that this is how things are, and this is how you can be happy, but not rich. Like, in a way, I feel like he's not saying that this is particularly the right way of kind of doing stuff, and there's a little bit of that tone in there where he's like, well, he always keeps on bringing examples of real life human interaction in which humans are sometimes, incompassionate. So he's like, okay, so he's seeing what's going on. There's a market already. It's not that he invented it, and he's just kind of saying how, just kind of putting out the status quo. I don't think he's really propagating it. He just kind of tells you how to be happy in that situation.
It's interesting how actually the sort of neoliberals, or I don't know if you use that word, but they tell the exact same story. They're like, look, this is the way the world works. If we have strong labor unions, salaries go up, companies will invest elsewhere. I mean, it's the same kind of deep pessimism about the world, and lack of belief in possibility of change. But optimism, what's the optimism?
Do you see the contradictions that on the one hand he believes that everything is gonna be fixed in a magical kind of way, and at the same time he's pessimistic in terms of what the poor or the people can do. So you see these two things come together, optimism and pessimism. What lacks here is a hopeful idea of humanity. It's a kind of
agreed,
that, all right,
very
we
little
can do
hope.
good things, but we can do bad things. And by saying this, I'm not endorsing neither the Marxist point of view, neither this point of view. I would suggest something completely different. I think that the problems are much deeper than who is the ruling class. I think problems are much deeper rooted in humanity. And to be honest, I found much more inspiring some religious viewpoints than the Marxist or the liberal viewpoints. But let's stick on the main concern. What is the practical value of this text?
Yes, that's the question.
What we can keep from that? I think there are some good ideas here, but some have to be critically approached and reevaluated.
What are the good ideas in your like, what would you say?
When he speaks
Something
about
to build on,
sentiments,
because this quite infuriates me now when I think about
I like
this bourgeois ideology. Indeed. Yeah.
I like his idea about the sentiments, about the idea of what sentiments can do in the public. But at the same time, I'm very skeptical about public sentiments. Let's say, for instance, that I feel sympathy for you, okay? Not just sympathy, empathy. By the way, I have another book for the differences between sympathy and empathy. Try Brené Brown.
I've heard of her.
Yeah, Brené Brown, Daring Greatly.
What?
Daring Greatly.
Daring Greatly.
Yes.
So what else have I've read some from
her. Very, she outlines the differences between empathy and sympathy. Okay, let's say that you are...
in Power of Vulnerability.
Exactly.
Great author, Brené Brown. So she's with a B, not René. But
she's too much on the left if you don't like the left. But I think read it. Please read it, because no matter if you agree or not, you still can take something useful from authors you don't like. So I agree. I like this idea of public sentiments,
but at the same time, I'm very skeptical about that because I can feel empathy with you when you're suffering, but where does this empathy stop? If you go out and take arms and start shooting those who you think have made harm against you, how I'm gonna stop this empathy, this sympathy towards you? Because sympathy is a sentiment.
Towards who? Towards
you. You're
I'm shooting.
You're shooting people because you feel oppressed or something like that, and I sympathize with you. So where does this sympathy end? It's a sentiment.
You don't have to necessarily sympathize, do you? Because like antipathy is also a part of his.
Yes. Let's talk about compassion. So let's take as an example the French Revolution. Okay, there was the idea of compassion with the poor. Whatever the poor can do is justifiable because it's compassion, it's passion, it's not judgment. It's not like saying, I agree with this, what you do. I don't accept the fact that you are deprived. You should not live like that, but you should not hang people or you should not execute people publicly. Because compassion is a sentiment, and sentiment is hard, cannot be rationalized easily.
Yeah.
So you cannot easily stop and say, I agree with what you do here, but not here.
But
it's
this
the
is
same on the left and the right at the moment.
Yeah.
Both are putting forward like, oh, we're so compassionate. One is about the poor, and the other one is I don't know about the oppressed white man or someone like, it's the same stuff. It's very dangerous.
I don't think there's I don't think the like kind of Smith's theory doesn't. I think he actually even speaks about it at one point where he says that you are compassionate towards a person when a person is feeling that he could be judged, and this person, then this shooter or someone, is trying to, as much as he can, be compassionable, like be receiving compassion towards himself, and yes, this will be injustice. So justice will be there to stop that. Should be there, and you should invest into all sorts of ways of enforcing justice.
How do you feel justice when we have blocked your capacity to judge? Justice, a judgment.
It will come. It will come to you eventually, or else it wouldn't. But then you have to test it. You have to be judgeable in order to be.
Okay, so let's have another idea then. Instead of calling about public sentiments, let's talk about serene sentiments. These sentiments are not very deep, so you're able to control them. So you're able to understand when a person is doing something wrong, and you say, I don't feel sympathy for you anymore. I don't sympathize with your actions. That's it. You have crossed the line. It's enough, man. But when you say that I have sympathy with your situation and we all got to do something about that, that's for me, this is not compassion. I call it piety. It's a quite religious quality, because it's the idea, it comes from the Bible, from the idea that says that be devoted to each other. But if God orders people to be devoted to each other, then by devoting yourself to others, you're pleasing God. Okay?
Yeah.
You getting the point? So, if I go out in the street and start shooting people, I'm not feeling devoted to others. I'm harming others.
Yeah.
If I oppress someone and take all the resources from him, still I'm not devoted to other people. I'm acting selfishly. So I think this is the best idea, to find the balances in terms of where our support for those who feel injustices should end.
It says, I think the first 2 pages, Adam Smith explained, where he was talking about having fellow feelings for the other. Let me just try and find where he says,
I also remember there's something about this.
Where he talked about someone, an angry man, reacting. So I'll have fellow feeling as a standby.
Yes, fellow
bystander. Sorry, I'll have fellow feeling for someone who's have sorrow If it's, I feel sorrow. If the person is joyful, I feel joyful. But when I pass by and I see an angry man, I don't feel compassion because that's not what is expected. We kind of mirror our own, or say the other person's, we mirror their feelings. So when they're sad, we're sad. When they're happy, we're happy. But when you go and see an angry man, let's say the man shooting, you feel no compassion. That's where it stops. Adam says it in what's the page? Because my laptop is giving me a different page. Yours. I think it must be on page 60.
The beginning of part 3.
It was it, yeah. Yeah, you see when you talk about the angry man, the same way. Talking about the.
I'm so sorry, guys. I have to leave.
No worries.
But great discussion, and please feel free to continue or go to the pub or something like that. So the final thing then is Nietzsche on Thursday.
Yes.
Really hope everyone. Selena will be presenting, and we're gonna have a pub session after that to talk about another reading group, which could be called something called Understanding the Crisis of Meaning in Western Thought, or something like that, but less academic. So I hope
Less academic.
Well,
When was that decided?
It wasn't decided. This is the discussion. I just have had some feedback saying that we are too academic, and I think people are scared to engage with us.
Two different
Which is a shame. I also feel like we should almost have a reading list at the end of the agenda, because these things that you've been pointing on, everyone's been pointing are really, really interesting.
Yeah, true. I have too many books that I've kind of kept on adding to my personal reading list that I don't know what to start.
Yeah. Okay, I'm so sorry, guys. I have to leave, but great session.
See you on
And
Thursday.
see you on Thursday.
See you soon.
Still trying to retrieve the page, but see.
I'll create this section. I think I don't remember.
You remember? You don't remember?
Yeah.
It was it's at the beginning. I think the first 4 pages. I'm sure it was talking about where our compassion stops, where we see an angry man reacting, because it's naturally in us. You go in somewhere, someone's crying, you go, oh, why is he crying? Someone's laughing, you're happy. But you see someone angry reacting, and you go, hang on a minute, no sympathy there, blank. I think he talks about this, so I don't know if
There is some stuff on like-mindedness as well, is that we kind of derive pleasure from sympathy with kind of the sentiments of others. So it's there is this element of mirroring, and we're delighted to experience that. It's not, yeah. I mean, he plays it really safe with this intelligent design card, I feel. Almost too safe. That, in the end, we might be faulty in our judgment, in our sympathy, and give too much sympathy for those who don't deserve and not enough sympathy for those who do. But in the end, it's all gonna work out. That's such a lazy argument, man. Like, isn't it?
It's something that I see quite popular. I mean, definitely popular. Well, by the government, or just common in religion in general. That's the way they settle people down.
Mm-hmm.
Because assure them, oh, but it will be fine. Give them just possible happy ending, just like how the story goes.
Yeah.
That's the way that they've been settling people and work. Especially if, they manage to show them all these goals, like, oh, but look at all these other people, they work hard too, and now they're also rich. This is like, your model, this is how your end goal are going to be. They have a fantasy to feed this.
But you know what? I keep thinking about this kind of historical context that I tried to kind of nip into in the beginning of my presentation, where it is only the beginning of the idea of some sort of happiness or unhappiness by our own kind of will and deriving from our own actions. So there must be something a little bit different. So because I mean, before that there was even not much of kind of this belief in social engineering and any kind of social impact on the way we kind of do things. And then he comes out with this still a very almost a kind of intrinsically theistic argument still. So I mean, and what it kind of where it goes on next in the history of modern thought is almost is even makes a little bit more sense maybe rather than I don't know. So he I don't know. It's I'm trying to take out valuable things from it. I mean, I do understand that if you follow this, you will be happy. You will find happiness, but you will be poor. You will not find money, but you will find happiness.
It makes sense at some point because some rich are not happy at all.
Yeah, that's what he kind of promises. But it's actually if we actually kind of think about. Well, I mean, I don't want to end this on this note because I do. When I was reading it, I mean, this idea of acting out of self-interest. I mean, that is prove me wrong. Like really, this is amazing.
Faustian.
Yeah.
Familiar with the term Faustian?
I mean, it's, but it's Faust from Faust. Yeah.
If you study Oswald Spengler, that was very conservative philosopher. Do study him. He called this aspect of liberalism as Faustian because it is based on the idea that humans need more and more and more when they act of self-interest. So what civilization should do should give them. For instance, you desire a quantity A.
Yeah.
The market pattern will provide you the A and will provide you a legal framework to access the A. The very next day, because your desires are Faustian, that means insatiable, the markets, you will decide...
in that way, Faustian.
Yeah,
okay.
You will decide A plus 2. So the markets will give it to you.
A plus N then.
A plus ad infinitum. Imagine that. So this is what he calls Faustian. And he predicts the collapse of Western civilization because he says that, all right, this is like the Tower of Babel. How far we can go with that, man?
Yeah, I see, but I mean, this kind of this idea of not going overboard with this, I actually really like. I feel really touched by it that we do act of self-interest, but this is the best way to do it. Otherwise,
We are not saying that it is necessarily bad. The thing is, again, up to what degree?
Yes, but he sets out a degree, doesn't he? He provides us with a degree up to when, and he has justice to regulate this.
I'm not saying that it was Adam Smith's fault for that. I think the major problem here starts from other philosophers, from the utilitarian point of view, and I think from Bethnamians or something like that, and those who were explicitly pro-market in the sense of being libertarian.
Yeah.
I don't think that Adam Smith was like that, but you can interpret him like that.
But if we were just to kind of think that what went wrong then, was it because people did not then feel bad when they should for wanting more? Because most of us who were still are part of the kind of this capitalist enterprise where we always, when we conduct our custom based on mutual respect and because we it's how we would kind of treat ourselves, and this is all kind of self-regulating, capitalism, blah blah blah. So what went wrong then? Were these people, were the rich then not capitalists enough, or because he says that if you are rich and if you're actually doing something wrong, this will eat you alive. Like this inner person would like make you feel terrible, and in the end, justice will be served in the other world. But what happened then? Was the justice? What happened? Where was his justice?
I think it's quite an idealistic view on wealth because it's expecting people to feel some, sense of guilt. But
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying.
And-
Did they not have the sense of guilt then?
obviously nowadays we are so for the sense of, oh, if you get to where you are right now, you probably work hard to earn it, which, yeah, applicable, but for example, people who inherit, they have an easier task, even like the same amount, by two different people, but different starting point. That
Yeah,
makes
true. But also he almost. I mean, so does he believe in pure evil then? Adam Smith.
It's very strange.
Because he almost doesn't, does it? He's like, well, this person is probably acting in this way because he's stupid, or his inner person is conflicted, blah, 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 blah. He's blind. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's judging another man's actions based on corrupted, that kind of stuff. He's not evil. He's not doing bad. He will learn that. But then, and we see this whole kind of postmodernist scholarship, like also disregarding pure evil, but then do these fall into the same category as with Adam Smith? Because I don't see it that he is, and that's very unusual for a philosopher of his age.
Is it not because it's coming from, you probably tell me, it's coming from an era where religion was very much entrenched in people's mind, and religion kind of brought about the social construct, and therefore religion was like God, and God is there. So if you do that,
Reaction to religion, what you mean?
no, because it comes from a religious perspective, isn't it? It's a religious person, isn't it?
He is a very religious
So,
person, yeah.
at the time,
Which
you
is
could say
unusual,
that
actually.
Religion had so much. It's not like today you say
Yeah.
something and people are woke. You say something and say,